Yeah. Okay. So yes, we are live. So I'll start. We'll start with you. So good morning and greetings. I'm Shraddha Mittal, research mentor and policy analyst at Sarkari School. Along with Preeti, we are your host for this session, which is a part of virtual national conference on the theme education through the G20 lens. The conference has been diligently curated by the Policy Advocacy and Research team at Sarkari School in collaboration with Civil20 is uh, in Civil20 Chaupal and the research vertical of Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts, Coimbatore. C20 is one of the official engagements group of the G20. It provides a platform for civil society organizations around the world to voice the people's aspiration with the world's leader in G20. C20 also aims to protect the essence of the sector, promote social and economic development with the vision that no one should be left behind. So, under the Indian presidency of G20 this year, the Civil 20 remains committed to advocate evidence based policy recommendations. The priority issues of C20 will focus on solving the socio-economic matters which touch the daily lives of people, which include education, health, environment, technology, and seva, that is sense of service. So it is a privilege to be welcoming you all. What we are hoping will be an invigorating discussion. I would like to call upon my team member Ria to present a formal welcome address to our guests and viewers and introduce the organization. So Ria, can you start with the welcome address?
Yes, thank you so much, Shraddha. Good morning, one and all present here. I would like to welcome you all to this panel discussion on our inaugural ceremony. I bid a very warm welcome to our mentors, our esteemed guests, and my fellow teammates and the viewers. It is my honor to welcome our distinguished speaker for today, Ms. Lauren Power, our chief guest, Sharad Sagar, who will be joining us shortly, who have taken out their valuable time to grace this event with their presence and share their knowledge and experience with us. Sarkari School or WeCitizen Foundation is an initiative that seeks to bridge distance between society and government schools in India. There exists today a shadow of stereotypes around Sarkari school and their impact. A poor narrative that overlooks their successes and focuses solely on their inadequacies. Sarkari School aims to shift this narrative by equipping readers with facts and stories of resounding success and hope. It aspires to begin constructive dialogue between educators, policymakers, Sarkari school students, and teachers, amalgamating all ideas and efforts into feasible solution towards a social change. With a multitude of projects under its wing, like Project Gudia, Project Arogya, Project Vedna, Project Kahani Kosh, we aim to uplift government school students. Policy advocacy and research team of Sarkari School brings together young policy enthusiasts, budding researchers who aspire to make a difference. Our strategy is to work on policy research pertaining to various topics relevant to education in India, and it aims to serve as a knowledge platform for teachers, bureaucrats, policymakers, and other stakeholders. We are sure the session will greatly advance that aim. We are looking forward to learning from you all today, and I hope this discussion inspires all of our viewers to learn, grow, aspire, and bring change. Over to the hosts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria, for this warm welcome and telling us more about Sarkari School and its journey towards educational equity. So, before we proceed further, I would like to call upon Arushi to tell us a little about the conference and the topic of this panel. Arushi, please.
Thank you, Shraddha. The globalized world that we live in today reflects the truth inherent in the Indian ethos of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. Sustainable Development Goals of 2030, which have underpinned global and national policy discourse since their adoption in 2015, and will continue to dominate the conversation for the coming decade are based on recognizing the power of international cooperation. One world, one family, one future, as the theme of India's G20 presidency reiterates the sentiment that local problems can benefit from global solutions. It is in this spirit of promoting debate, deliberation, and discussion regarding policy challenges that Sarkari School and WeCitizens Foundation, in association with C20 Chaupal, bring to you a virtual national conference on education through a G20 lens. The overarching theme of this year is the role of multilateral and bilateral international collaboration in bringing about education reforms by improving the quality of education, reducing inequality, both economic and otherwise, and understanding the process of multilateral partnerships in impacting reforms, with a special focus on the practices and experiences of the G20. Come join with us in our endeavor to brainstorm, learn, and grow. Over to the hosts.
Thank you so much, Arushi. So now that we have introduced our guest, we would like to move to the speech part. And for that, let's call upon, I will call Preeti to introduce our first guest, Ms. Lauren. And without much ado, we will start the discussion. So, Preeti, please introduce our guest.
Hello, Miss Lauren. Now have a brief introduction about our first panelist. Mrs. Lauren S. Power is an award-winning researcher, author, speaker, and advocate for education, youth, and migrants. She is a researcher and a PhD candidate in the International Relations at the University of Tokyo, with a focus on understanding the economic and social life of migrants. Ms. Lauren is the founder and managing director of Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, Tokyo, a youth-led, youth-focused NGO that fosters international, inclusive, and intergenerational dialogue on pivotal issues for Japan and the world. Previously, Lauren has taught at Temple University, Japan as an adjunct professor and has worked for and in partnership with OECD, UNMGCY, UNESCAP, UNOHCHR, and the G20 2020 to 2023 and G7 2023. She has been a contributing researcher to the Research Center for Sustainable Peace, the Refugee Review, the Journal for Human Security Studies, and more.
Thank you so much, Preeti, for that amazing introduction. I'm humbled to be introduced. It is my pleasure to be with all of you today. Good morning, good evening, and good night to all of you. Please let me extend my thanks to the C20 Chaupal and Policy Advocacy and Research Team, the Sarkari School, and WeCitizens International, and also to Mr. Rajan for this wonderful opportunity. Today, I'm joining you from Tokyo, as you know, where I have been busy working with the W7 and C7 engagement groups as a part of Japan's G7 presidency and the 2023 G7 summit to be held in May of this year. While it is my first year to be working with the G7, I have been a stakeholder at the G20 for several years. First, in 2020, under the Saudi presidency, I was selected as the head delegate of the American Youth Delegation to the G20 Youth Summit, or Y20. Next, in 2021, under the Italian presidency, I was a member of the C20 Working Group on Global Citizenship and Education and the Working Group on the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development. The following year, under the Indonesian presidency, I was a member of the Education, Digitalization, and Civic Space Working Group and SDGs and Humanitarian Working Group. And that year, finally, I could attend the 2022 C20 Bali Summit in person, which was a remarkable and impactful experience, especially after having done so much of our prior interactions online. I'm sure we can all relate to that. Education has been a key topic for me throughout all of this involvement. Now, this year, I'm filled with anticipation of a truly vibrant and influential experience as a C20 stakeholder to the 2023 G20 under India's inaugural presidency. This year, I'm a member of the Sustainable and Resilient Communities and Education and Digital Transformation Working Groups, and it is in this capacity that I would like to share my remarks today. The topic of today's conference is education through a G20 lens, and I think this conversation is very well timed. Now, fairly early into India's G20 presidency, each of us has an opportunity to consider the question, how would you like to see and experience education in the world? Or how should education be experienced in the world? It is a simple but incredibly important question. The answers determine not only the learning experience itself, but also the life course to follow. I'd like to invite each of you in the audience to view your answer to this question as more than an aspiration. There are so many challenges in the field of education, and your answer, your vision of a better world, has the potential to drive positive change, both in your local community and at the G20 level. But before we can talk about how to improve education or what the G20 has to do with it, I think it's important for us to understand what education is. In a broad sense, we can think of education as the transmission of knowledge, both in a formal sense, as many of us will have experienced at school or in a classroom environment, and also various non formal formats, such as learning social norms and values, copying behaviors of those around us that may be helpful in daily life, or understanding one's own culture and the cultures of others. Undoubtedly, formal and non formal education are of great importance to us as individuals, as societies, and as an interconnected global community. As we begin to look at the specifics of formal and non formal education, however, the complexities quickly become clear. I will share a few examples. First, considering formal education, how many years of learning and in which subjects are needed to produce cohorts of young graduates who are equipped, ready, and willing to contribute to society, both economically and in terms of civic duty. If the high quality of education outpaces the local employment opportunities, then it can lead to the issue of brain drain when a country's best and brightest choose to build their careers abroad. Second, if education is to be compulsory, and primary and secondary education is compulsory for many children and youth in most G20 countries, then who shall pay for it? In countries with significant income gaps or widely unequal distributions of wealth across their various districts or provinces, how can access to a good quality education be standardized and ensured for all, regardless of the economic circumstances at birth? And for those with special learning needs, differences, or disabilities, how can we make sure education is more inclusive? Simply ensuring access to education is not enough. Without considering the quality, suitability, and real life opportunities education brings, education systems can reinforce inequalities and cycles of exclusion and even oppression. Finally, in G20 countries, which boast a highly educated populace, workers in professional careers find themselves increasingly challenged by the disruptions of new technologies. Having an advanced tertiary or terminal degree in your field may no longer be a guarantee of success or longevity of employment. In many industries, the half life or relevance of a skill is estimated at 5 years, with some technical skills lasting only a year or two. Formal education, therefore, is not only necessary to help young people begin their careers, it may be continually needed throughout one's lifetime. In aging societies, as exist in many G20 countries, how can employers be incentivized to upskill or reskill their mid to late career workers rather than making them redundant and taking on fresh graduates with current technical training at lower salaries? As we all know, the COVID-19 crisis has caused unprecedented setbacks in education. It has blurred the boundaries between formal and non-formal education, and it has forced the rapid digitalization of the classroom. And the situation is still evolving, introducing more complexities and challenges for global leaders and decision makers like the G20. According to the OECD, 1.5 billion students in 188 countries were locked out of their schools in 2020. Recognizing the serious impact of school closures on the learning and well-being of students, Many countries adjusted their COVID containment strategies for school closures, which eased the burden of childcare for families and it boosted the educational continuity for students. COVID 19 shutdowns also significantly affected adult learning, which dropped by 18 to 25%, according to the OECD. That's a loss of learning not easily recovered. Amidst these challenges and others, the G20 India presidency will meet to recommit themselves to the many good policies, plans, and practices that already exist and create new and innovative solutions and, hopefully, be held accountable for their timely implementation. Under COVID 19, we have had many disruptions in education, while also rapid acceleration in our reliance on digital technologies. This has brought many new challenges, which we see continually addressed by the G20. I'd like to share a few insights and also of my expectations for the coming year. So the C20 Italy 2021 policy pack identified the top issues in education to be closing the education financing gap, using lifelong learning to build a democratic culture, developing Education 4.0 through the promotion of global citizenship, transforming education at the service of sustainable development, and promoting gender equality and women and girls' empowerment in and through education. Last year, C20 Indonesia, the 2022 Education Sub-Working Group, decided to deliver its recommendations through three main issues: access to inclusive and safe quality education, supporting gender equality; transformative digital technologies for equitable education, focusing on developing digital infrastructure and teacher training; and empowering youth with 21st century working skills. We see these previous commitments strengthened in the G20 Bali Leaders Declaration, the prime outcome document from last year's G20 Bali Summit, in which the G20 leaders reaffirmed that access to education is a human right and a pivotal tool for inclusive and sustainable economic recovery. And they committed to act in solidarity with developing countries to rebuild more resilient, tech-enabled, accessible, and effective education systems, and to empower relevant actors within and beyond G20 countries to remove barriers to education, improve teaching and learning environments, and support transitions within and across all stages of education, with emphasis on women and girls. They underscored the importance of mental health and well-being in education, and they reaffirmed the importance of education for sustainable development and their commitment to SDG 4 to include and create equitable quality education for all. And finally, they also committed to promoting lifelong learning at all levels amidst the changing nature of work and to encourage partnership in this regard. Reflecting on all of this for G20 India, I believe we can expect to see a reaffirmation of prior G20 commitments on education, with particular emphasis on access and inclusivity, cooperation between international educational institutions and policymaking bodies, education for global citizenship and sustainability, and e-governance and digital boundaries that are fit for purpose and protect the health, well-being, and socioeconomic interests of all peoples. I expect a robust and busy agenda for those of us in the C20 Education and Digital Transformation Working Group, and I hope for fruitful outcomes and solid delivery from our G20 leaders. With that, I will close my remarks by returning to my initial question for the audience. How would you like to see and experience education in the world? What should we protect? What should we change? What issues should take priority? I hope you will consider your answers carefully, and when you have your clarity and when you are ready, I would welcome you to join the global efforts to improve education for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Lauren. Your speech was really wonderful and insightful. I must say how you started with the uh, like how the challenge in education has been, how the dynamics of education has been changing. Like earlier, we just have education of textbook and we live our whole life with that knowledge. But now our knowledge has to be ever changing. We have to adopt the method of learning for lifetime where we have to build on the knowledge, the current affairs, the skills. Then you went on. to talk about the COVID times, that how education see a backsliding in the COVID times, and even in India, we have a very much loss in the education, in digitalization of education, and another point which you mentioned about the mental health. That's a very good point because it's a taboo. People do not know about it. They just consider it as a scapegoat for not studying or something, but actually it is a matter, it is a issue which we should focus upon. For that, in India we have a scheme of margdarshan and something with uh, our HRD ministry also. They have Manodarpan named portal for students. So, and about your question that what we aspire the education to be in the world, we feel that education should be globalized. A standard education should be there in the world where every child learn the same thing or a similar thing, I should say. We can also have a nudge theory where we show people that your future will be secure if you have this particular educational skills. So these are some of the things which we can build upon. We can ask our other speakers also what they think it about. So now I would like to call Preeti to ask some of the questions to you. Preeti, can you?
Yes, thank you, Miss Lauren, for that inspiring and insightful speech. We have a question from one of our audience. Uh, Ramesh Vadoni Prasad, he asked, how can a teacher have all that skill sets to meet the multiple dimension of learning required for inclusion? So he's basically asking how to train teachers so that to have an inclusive education system.
Thank you so much for that question. I think it's an important question. And I think that if we had a clear answer to that question, we would probably be in an easier position today. But the fact of the matter is that having a clear answer on how to best train teachers is very difficult. It's also very much culturally and context specific. I think that we have to keep in mind that each individual teacher is one contributor to a larger global system. And with that in mind, one person cannot be everything to everyone. So we shouldn't think like that. But it is possible for a teacher to be someone who is very important to their community, to their students. And with that in mind, a teacher can master their local curriculum. They can innovate for their community. They can think about what their students need and do their best to provide that. Um, a curriculum in Japan, for example, where I live, is nothing at all like the curriculum where I grew up in the United States. I think that that's okay. Both countries have a wonderful quality of education for many people. And I think that when we talk about teacher training, in my view, something that might be considered an innovation is to also implement this idea of lifelong learning to teachers as well. I think that many people still have this preconception that after you receive your terminal degree, that's all. You can start your career and you just continue working in your career. In fact, teachers are also thought leaders. They are the ones who are in touch with students on a daily basis. Their voices should be amplified and heard and listened to by governments and also by policymakers as standards of teacher training are made. Having a degree in teacher training is not enough. Teachers should also be encouraged to continue their own learning and to continue to upskill and remain important policymakers in their own right. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Miss Lauren. I hope that answered the question of our guest. Uh, I, I would like to add a point, and I have a question of my own that just as much that teacher upscaling is needed, I think we should include parents into the whole scenario as well, because parents often pressurize students to take up a path that the parents want the children to take, and ignoring the fact that the children might have potential in something totally different. That creates a lot of mental burden on the students too. So how can we involve parents into the whole conversation about education, because it's tough to change their orthodox thinking.
You're absolutely right. Before I talked about non-formal education, parenting skills and what goes on in the house and what goes on in the family and the community is a classic example of non-formal education. The values that you grow up with, what your parents expect from you, this is a very important part of your education. It's not your formal education, but as you've just pointed out, it can be something that very much affects your life course. So I think that involving parents and having them understand um, the way that your non formal education interacts with formal education curriculums changes. What existed for your parents' generation may not exist now, or it may be different, or it might be in the process of changing. And parents don't know that maybe because it's been some years since they've been through this. And they should also be let into that conversation. I think it's natural for parents to want their children to do well. And I think that if we give them the information to make the best decisions that they can in their child's best interest, they will. And so I agree with you. Parents should be brought into these conversations and they should be informed about things like mental health and how it's actually a bit troubling for students to be pressured into a career that they may prefer not to do. So excellent question.
Thank you, Ms. Lauren. We'll all keep that in mind when we have an opportunity to make a change. So let's take another question from our audience. Someone asked that how to make refugee education more inclusive. What about all those children or even youth people who are stuck in refugee camps, who are like deprived of education? What about them?
So, in my field of migrant and refugee studies, this is actually a key topic, and this is something that G20 leaders can align on in more detail, I believe. When we talk about refugees in particular, um, typically these are not counted as part of the citizenry, and in that sense, in some countries, they are not. The state is not bound to provide compulsory education since they are not counted as citizens. And so what we tend to have is in some cases an exclusion of refugee educational institutions. There, it's sort of considered optional. Oh, states may provide education benefit, but they're not required to because these are not citizens. So until that legal obligation changes, until we can enforce under the same set of educational standards that refugee children are humans as well. Refugee children have also the human right to education. They deserve to have the same opportunities. Until we have that change happen and recognizing refugees needing education, I think it will be very difficult to experience uniformity or inclusivity because this is primarily the main fallback whenever this is critiqued. The state will say, oh, they're not the citizenry. We don't, have them under the umbrella of compulsory education. So this needs to be a policy change. And I think that we do have some really wonderful non-formal educational pathways that currently exist for refugees who are in that situation where they are not falling under compulsory education. These are often provided by NGOs or by intergovernmental organizations to provide this kind of support. But it would be better if it could fall under the state that can be more context specific, more locally specific. That way, refugees can actually be, in a way, enculturated and brought into the society in a more meaningful way by participating in the educational institution side by side with the local children. This is a way to, create that community cohesion and integration that's so important for their empowerment. So I think that this is something that would be very wonderful to see.
Thank you, Ms. Lauren. I hope that answers our listeners' questions. Let's move on to the next question. Darsh asks that how can we reduce social inequalities in educational system? Because we see, apart from digital divide, there lies a bigger and more deeply rooted problem, that is the social divide. So how do we tackle that?
This was something that I brought up about, widely distributed wealth, especially across provinces. And we see this all over the world, especially in larger countries. We'll have metropolitan centers where we have high degrees of wealth concentrated. And naturally, side by side, along with that, comes highly supported educational institutions with high quality of teaching staff, high quality of education. And unfortunately, the opposite occurs in maybe more rural provinces or rural areas where the salary standards are lower, the income per capita is lower. So the educational institutions in those areas, unless there is intervention, will tend to have lower paid staff, perhaps lower quality of staff in terms of qualification and experience. And of course, this trickles down to the student learning experience as well. In order to counteract this economic income disparity and the kind of disparities in education that are associated with that, government intervention can help. There are a number of different types of initiatives that exist in the world that I think do a good job of that. One of them has to do with teacher rotation. So if you are an employee of a state institution, you should not only be required to stay in one school the entire time. It should be helpful to have high quality, high paid teachers go on a circuit tour where they can go to schools around provinces that are not in the city centers so that they are able to share their good quality of education with others. Having this is also impactful to the teacher because it exposes them to the wide different types of learning and needs of the learners all over their country. Because the learning and needs of someone who is in a lower income rural environment may be quite different from those in a higher income urban environment. And I think that we have an example of that as being very good. During COVID, I know China did an interesting model where they used ICT in the classroom technology to bring big city teachers into the provinces. So the people were not physically going there, but they could still have their classes being presented. And this lowers that barrier of being able to have equitable access to great quality of education. In this sense, technology and the digitalization of the classroom is a wonderful tool in being able to bring us more closer to an equitable education. It's not ideal, but it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Miss Lauren. Your answers were really amazing, and to all the questions, you have really insightful answers. So we are very much inspired by our answers and by your thought processes. So now we have our second guest with us in this studio, and we are very much looking forward to hear to Mr. Sharad Sagar. So now, sir, that you are here, so we will give a brief introduction about you, and then we will listen to your speech. So now, I would like to call Preeti to give a brief introduction about Mr. Sagar. Uh, Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Sharad. Let's have a brief intro about his achievements. Mr. Sharad Vivek Sagar is a globally renowned social entrepreneur, noted thought leader, powerful orator, and a widely followed youth icon. He is the first Indian to be elected as president of the student government at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Raised in the small towns and villages of Bihar, Sagar founded the national organization Dexterity Global at the age of just 16, where funds of rupees 144 crores have been achieved. President Barack Obama invited him to the White House. Forbes listed him on the global Forbes 30 under 30 list. Rockefeller Foundation inducted him in the list of 100 next century innovators. The Nobel Peace Center invited him to the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony, and the Queen of England included him in the Queen's Young Leaders list. India's most watched television show, Kaun Banega Crorepati, invited him as the youngest expert on the show. After a stirring speech at the Vivekananda Memorial in Vadodara, India's leading media house, Divya Bhaskar, called Sagar the Vivekananda of 21st century. Michigan State University put him on its social entrepreneurship syllabus. The government of Taiwan quoted him on their social impact agenda, while the Ramakrishna Mutt and the Mission featured him on their annual calendar. In 2022, Dainik Jagran bestowed upon Sagar the Editor's Choice Award for India's youth icon for representing the bold face of young India and redefining education and leadership for millions of young Indians.
Thank you very much for having me. I begin at the outset by congratulating you for putting together this wonderful virtual conference. For everybody who's participating in whatever capacity, those who've been organizers, those who are speakers, uh, everybody who's involved. What a wonderful time to be talking about education, looking at it from a G20 lens. Uh, in a year when India is doing the presidency of G20 in general. For several of us who are involved, and several of us who will be hearing this later, the question might occur to us that what does the G20 presidency technically mean at this point in time? And I know some of you might have read or heard this in the past, but to bring some context, 80% of the world GDP is shared between, produced by these G20 member countries. These G20 member countries do 75% of international trade. Two-thirds of the global population lives in these G20 countries, and they share 60% of the global landmass. Now, when these G20 countries come together in our wonderful motherland, when they are here in India this year, it is fitting that more and more young people, more and more people in the civil society have this conversation about G20 in general and our shared goals, our collective ambition or aspirations that we see. When we talk about education at this point in time, I know there can be a bottom up conversation about what all needs to be advanced, what all needs to be adjusted, what all needs to be fixed when it comes to education, ranging from grassroots to curriculum to teacher to student ratio. There are 200 things that we can talk about, each one equally important. When we look at it from a top down perspective, I think for us as a country, India being 65% young, and for G20 member nations in general, the shared prosperity or the share of the global GDP or the international trade or the world population or landmass that they hold together, it becomes important to talk about what kind of a world will we pass on to the next generation and how equipped will they be to, one, of course, live, thrive, prosper in that world, but also take care of it in several ways. Look at the advancements and adjustments. Look at what to protect, what to build on. And in that case, education becomes extremely important. It is not going to be that easy to take care of so many things that exist many times in contradiction to each other. As the conversation happens about development, on the other end, the conversation is about making sure that we protect our climate for our future generations. On one end, as the conversation is about economic advances, on the other end, it is about making sure that everybody is able to earn a living, make sure that they have a fair quality of life, a standard of living in whichever part of the world they live in. There are a lot of dualities when it comes to technology, when it comes to economy, when it comes to climate, when it comes to just in general what kind of spaces we need to build and create. And when it comes to education through a G20 lens, our focus on innovation, our focus on sustainability, our focus on equity, these have to be talking points not just in India, but across all G20 countries. In the 21st century, if we want to be able to say at the end of our life journeys that we are proud of what we achieved and prouder of what we passed on to the next generation, it is important to keep in mind that innovation, not just in education, but also through education, is fostered in schools, in communities, in countries, so that the challenges of the future or the needs of the future can be met through what our kids learned in classroom, the skills that they mastered, the exposure that they gained, the experiences that were created for them. When we talk about sustainability, sustainability in every single way is going to be crucial and critical in our life journeys. How do we shape young citizens from a young age with the mindset and the mentality, not just to, make sustainable choices, but also build, co create, and cohabitate spaces which are sustainable, co create products which are sustainable as we move forward. As far as equity is concerned, I think anybody who is passionate about education or just in general the human race deeply and strongly believes in how important equity is in terms of making sure that every child has the opportunity to dream a dream and to move forward and achieve it. I know majority of the things that I have pointed out are top down at this point and largely vague, but I think with so many people who are experts, who have the precision to really pinpoint on one thing and build on, I'm trying to give a wider uh, up top preview of what awaits us if we look at it from a G20 lens. As I go deeper down into the conversation, 125 years, 130 years ago, a patriot monk in India, Swami Vivekananda, talked about something beautifully. It almost seems like he was setting an agenda for G20 for India, at least to take forward. He said in those days that each nation has a mission on the planet, and India's mission is to guide humanity. The guiding of humanity part that he was saying was not, in terms of dominating, in terms of having a monopoly. It was basically, today what we teach as yoga and mindfulness, what we talk about as shared prosperity and sustainability. These are essentially ideas that our sages, our monks, our citizens for thousands of years have meditated about. For thousands of years, they have propagated these ideas. And when Swami Vivekananda says that, something that he adds on when he talks about education, about people, I think is of critical importance when we think about our children in schools today. One of the shortest sentences that Swamiji ever uttered was be and make. Our education from bottom up has to be an education that focuses on be and make. How do we make sure that every child is made capable in an area of interest that the child shares and has the ability to make other people capable in it or do something with that education? Connecting our classroom education with the world outside is of critical importance in any country that hopes to tap into its young generation to build a future that is both prosperous for everyone and at the same time it is in harmony with the planet, with people, with future in general. At this point, there is an idea that Swami Vivekananda shares about patriotism that I want to put forward. I know when the conversation is about patriotism, one might wonder what does it have to do with education. But it is one of the most beautiful ideas on patriotism that I've ever read in my life. And Swami Vivekananda says, I too have and I too have a definition of patriotism. And he says that I put forth three ideals in front of young people. The first ideal that he puts forward is he says, when you see people who are poor, when you see people who are weak, when you see people who are helpless, when you see people who are diseased, when you see people who need help, do you feel? Do you feel their pain? That is the first ideal of patriotism that Swami Vivekananda puts forward. That do you feel the pain of others? Do you keep walking or do you pause? Do you get your education and continue with your degree, with your paychecks, or you pause? You pause, you look around and you feel deeply the pain of those who are in need, those who are in distress, those who are in trouble, those who are struggling. Do you feel? That is the first ideal of patriotism that Swami Vivekananda puts forward. The second ideal of patriotism he puts forward is connected. He says, it is good that you feel. You feel the pain of the diseased, you feel the pain of the poor, you feel the pain of the helpless. But have you come up with a plan? That is the second ideal of patriotism that he puts forward. He says it is good that you feel, but it is more important that you come up with a plan to alleviate that pain, to solve that problem, to fix that issue. And then the third part that he says is that the third ideal that he puts forward is it is good that you feel, it is good that you've come up with a plan. But the question is, even if the whole world is opposed to you, even if you lack everything that you might need, if you lose all your name and wealth and glory, will you still continue to work on that plan? And he says these three ideals put together are my ideals of patriotism. When I connect that with education, as G20 member countries, as citizens of India right here at home, it is important that we give and provide an education to our kids where the first part is taken care of. And that is, we build citizens in our country who feel and feel and feel deeply about people around themselves, who feel for others, who feel for, everything that is around themselves. These can be broken systems, broken institutions. These can be areas where we can come in and fix a library that hasn't opened in the past decade or a classroom that doesn't have a teacher. Whatever it is, as citizens, we should feel and feel. As students, our kids should, that this should be inbuilt in our kids. The second part is As far as that compassion goes, that empathy goes, that sensitivity goes, it is important that we coach our kids, we train them, we hone and nurture them so that they can build solutions, they can work on plans, they can come up with a plan. That has to be a part of the education itself. And then comes the third part. And the second part can be about, innovation, about building, about co-creating, about teamwork and everything else. The third part is about that character, grit, resilience, or whatever you want to call it, that we need to imbibe in our kids as we move forward. I know as I speak that for some of you, it might be an idea that, all right, there are so many schools where we are yet to bring teachers. There are so many schools where kids are yet to find a decent bench, where the blackboard does not have a chalk. And we are talking about compassion and innovation and grit and resilience. Then here's the second part to it. Some of the work that we'll do will be policy level fixes. Some of the work we'll do will be community led efforts. But yet, some of the work that we'll do 25 years later is completely in our hand, and that will depend on those who are going to school today. How do we prepare them for the future? The seeds that we sow in their mind and heart about the kind of world that they want to raise their kids in, the kind of schools they want to build in an India that is at 100 years of political independence, I mean by that. So, overall, my concluding remark is that G20 is a great opportunity each year, this year even more, that in the land that gave to the world the Gurukuls, in a land where sons and daughters of emperors were sent for, 5 years and 10 years away from home, they were learning a bunch of different things, they were learning administration and kingdom. The Panchatantra tales were interestingly written so that all the sons and daughters of nobles and administrators and kings could get, life skills and values, all these things. So India is a wonderful country for member countries, for G20 member countries to come and reflect on education, the disparities that we face, and at the same time, the opportunity that exists in building systems of education, fostering an education forward that builds ethical individuals who care deeply about the society, about the planet, about the future, and who, with the greatest of compassion, can continue to spur the wheel of innovation that ensures that the world tomorrow is more prosperous, more just, more equal, and has a space for everyone where every child can dream a dream and build forward to take it forward in their own life journeys and in their own times. And as the world moves on. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very grateful that you invited me. I am even happier that this conversation is happening. It should happen in many places around the country. Congratulations to Sarkari School, We Care Foundation, and everybody who has been involved in this. Thank you very much. My pranams.
Thank you so much, sir. I must say that we have greatly moved by our chief guest speech, and I really admire how beautifully you have integrated the views of Swami Vivekanand and the line he followed. And I must say that we must abide by the ideals he put forth in the form of patriotism. So yes, we will abide by that. We will garner more views on how to promote our education system, how to advance our education in every nook and corner. So after that, we will now move to some discussion to know more about the future prospects of all the efforts which we put in till now. So for that, my first question is, as you have a wide spectrum of experience and knowledge, so according to you, what can be the best educational model for India? Okay, so I guess our guest will join us in a bit. Yes.
Our chief guest had some urgent work and he had to leave the meeting, so sorry about that. I guess we'll move further with the conference.
Okay. So, Miss Lauren, do you have any concluding views?
Sorry, could you repeat the question that you asked?
Yes, actually, I asked that due to a wide experience in G20 and the related fields, what do you think can be the best educational model for India or in general for the world?
Wow, what a big question. I think that if I were, I think to answer that question, I'd like to kind of keep it high level because I think if we go into the granularities, we could be here all day. But basically, I think that in terms of what the world needs, the world needs better compassion. The world needs more compassion. The world needs more humanity in education. I think that oftentimes, as we've heard from our other speaker, there's an overemphasis on what kind of skills you're building in terms of what you can provide to the workplace or how you can be competitive. We don't have an education system that tells us enough how we can be better people, how we can have more compassion, how we can improve the world. I think that you know, maybe we can understand that we don't need more successful people in the world. We need more loving people. We need more kind people. We need more people who are compassionate and prepared to help others. And I completely agree with my fellow panelist. We we need an education system that somehow instills those values, and that's true not only for India, that's true of the world. And if we are able to take inspiration this year, this G20, from these amazing thinkers and leaders of India to provide that to the rest of the world, I think it's a wonderful year for us to make that kind of progress.
Thank you, Ms. Lauren. I think that helps us understand the distinction between being educated and being merely literate, because being education also involves inculcating all those soft skills and those feelings, those values of compassion. So, with this, we are coming to an end of our conference. I hope we all learned a lot more than what we came with. Now,
Yes.
I would like to call on.
Pretty wait. We have the Sharad sir with us.
All right.
So, sir, can you take the questions now? Actually, we lost a connection with you earlier.
Yes, yes, for sure.
Okay, so as I was saying that we will take the next question, that we see that the students studying abroad get work at international bodies quite easily. But in India, it is a little bit lagging behind. So I want to understand the reason behind this lag. Is it the low exposure that Indians getting, or it is the lack of quality of Indian institutions that Indians are not getting the exposure at the international bodies?
I think it is a good question. Uh, at the outset, I want to apologize. It was not a network drop. I actually left the meeting thinking I was done. So I apologize for that. Um, so, Indians who are studying abroad and getting opportunities at international institutions, that is a reality. There are many who get that opportunity. But it is also true that many who study in our own country, they also get those opportunities. I will not comment on whether it is because they study here or they study there that they get the opportunity. I'll comment on a few things that sometimes you need for these kind of opportunities to come your way. And many times it is about, the level of research that you've done, the kind of papers you've written, the academic rigor you have shown while pursuing your undergraduate or graduate degree. And that academic rigor many times is better exhibited studying in these global systems of education as opposed to many times in our own. So it is the academic rigor that you exhibit. Alongside, many times it is what else have you done, what all have you been involved in. That too many times is exhibited better when you are in a top 10, top 100, top 500 institution in the world. Then the third thing is, many times job search is also a strategy. There are techniques, tactics, strategies involved in it. And many times it is, the alumni from the institution that you went to who are already working at those places, who many times handhold, who many times, put in a word for you, who many times coach you for it. So that kind of hand holding and mentoring also exists in many ways. So I do not see why we cannot do it from our own institutions. If we are able to show academic rigor, if we are able to show that the other things we have been involved in have shaped our ambitions to come and work at the international institution, and at the same time, if we can reach out uh, to people who have been there, done that, who work within those institutions, and have them, take out some time to mentor us or coach us or put in a word for us, that too can be helpful. But I think overall it will be academic rigor, what all you've been involved in, and just some experience from people who've been there, done that, and what advice they have for you.
Absolutely, sir. And I guess people will work upon that. So, just quickly, we are taking just one more question. That G20 has been in existence since long. So, what do you think is a significant contribution which G20 as an organization has on education?
Part of my conversation was actually focused on that G20 has to acknowledge that with its immense GDP, with its immense international trade, with the number of people who live in these countries, the landmass that we occupy, we have a higher responsibility towards sustainability, towards equity, towards innovation in general. And that is the reason why the best way to fine tune that is to find its initial points in our education itself, our classroom education to begin with. So uh, I think my remark was more or less 100% focused on this fact that as G20 member countries and G20 as a unit, the focus on innovation to meet the challenges of the future or to build and create new opportunities, the focus on sustainability, and the focus on equity is of paramount importance. And besides that, I think, like in every other field, there should be a conversation about the best practices that already exist in member countries and the failures and successes they have seen in the field of education. Having said that, contextual intelligence is something we should never forget. Many ideas that might work very well in some part of the world or the other might not work as well in our own country. So that contextual intelligence shall also be kept in mind as we look at the best practices across board in the member countries.
Thank you, Mr. Sharad, and thanks a lot for gracing our conference by being our chief guest.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too. So, once again, we're going to conclude our conference for today. I mean, this panel for today, and I will call upon Sakshi to propose a formal vote of thanks. Sakshi, please.
Thank you, Preeti. I'm delighted to express my gratitude and appreciation towards all the esteemed guests and dignitaries who have graced the conference with their wisdom and ideas. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a truly thoughtful, provoking decision, and it would not have been possible without you all esteemed guests. My heartfelt thanks to all the organization team and Sarkari School for their hard work and making this discussion a successful one. Last but not the least, I would thank you all and an audience and listener for active being part of the conference, being with this whole time. We really appreciate your participation. Once again, thank you to everyone and contribution towards making the event a success. Thank you, Lauren ma'am, for having a light over dynamic of education changing mental health and refugee education, and sir for having telling us how to make a sustainable choices, equity, and how do we prepare our youth for our future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Miss Lauren, for coming and giving me your precious time.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.